So this is my take on trying to explain the approval reset switch and a concept called virtual voting, which are key, I think, elements in the post-courticide era. So this is a tangle, and all of these numbers are transactions. Some transactions are not numbered, but you get a point. In this example, transaction 2 and transaction 3 are conflicting transactions, and one of them is a double spend. Let's assume that the fast probabilistic consensus deemed transaction 2 an approved transaction, and transaction 3 is a double spend. It's not valid. What does then happen? Nodes not knowing the outcome of the fast probabilistic consensus continued to append transactions to both subtangles. By subtangle, I mean like a part of the tangle. This is one subtangle and this is the other subtangle. So transaction 6 and transaction 7, even though they are honest, they reference a drop transaction 3. So what happens in this case? Well, transaction 2 and transaction 3 will both remain in the tangle, but transactions 6 and 7 will be inserted in a weak collection. I call it a weak queue, where we have transactions 6 and 7 here and strong tips 4 and 5 here. What does that mean? It means when a new transaction is issued, let's say this one, it uses a tip selection algorithm to try to come up with 2 tips that it's going to reference. There's a probability that it will pick a transaction from its weak queue and a probability that it will pick a transaction from its strong queue. If it picks a transaction from a weak queue, it references that transaction with a weak reference. This is a weak reference, this one here. What does that mean? It indicates that this transaction likes transaction 7, but it does not like its past cone. And by past cone, I mean its past history, all the transactions that 7 references. On the other hand, this transaction likes transaction 5, but it references as a strong reference, indicating that it likes transaction 5 and it likes its entire past cone. So it likes all of this. So this, I think you can maybe understand that there's a concept here called virtual voting. What does it really mean? It means that when a node issues a transaction, this transaction was issued by one node, this transaction was issued by another node, and this transaction was issued by a third node. All of these transactions reference other transactions, and by referencing those transactions, they essentially cast a vote. There is no need for these nodes to communicate with other nodes and tell them, hey, I like this transaction, I like this transaction, and I like this subtangle. No, they essentially append a new transaction, and the new transaction already holds enough information for other nodes to know the opinion of this node, which subtangle it prefers. So it comes back to this point. When a node references a transaction with a weak reference, like this one here, it's telling the entire network when it gossips this transaction referencing this one with a weak parent, it tells everybody, hey, I like why is it not changing? I like this transaction, but I do not like its past cone. So after other transactions get appended to subtangle, transaction 3 will not generate enough approval weight. It won't generate approval weight at all, because the approval weight of these future transactions will continue and will stop at these points. So what does that mean? It means that transaction 6 and transaction 7 will be considered valid because future transactions which come from different nodes reference them directly or indirectly, and all of those references are strong references. And considering that 6 and 7 were referenced at least by 1 weak reference, the approval weight will stop at these points and will not continue to transaction 3, and it will not continue this way to transaction 1. What does that mean? It means that 3 will not get enough approval weight to be considered a valid transaction, and transaction 1, on the other hand, has this branch here, which will generate enough approval weight to be considered a valid transaction. So at the end, all nodes come to consensus that the transaction 3 is not a valid transaction, and all future transactions referencing 6 and 7 approve 6 and 7, so they are considered valid transactions without the need of reattaching 6 and 7 to another subtangle which was not part of a subtangle that contained a conflict. So this is just my understanding. I may or may not be wrong, but please take a look, and if I've got something wrong, please tell me so I can learn.